The Shadow in the Lighthouse, a spooky tale from the coast. Old Man Omar was the lighthouse keeper of the small coastal town of Kiran. He had lived in the lighthouse for as long as he could remember, tending to the flickering light that guided ships safely through the stormy seas. Omar was a kind man with a heart of gold. He was always happy to help anyone in need. He would often share his food and stories with the townspeople, and he was always willing to lend a hand. Omar loved his life in the lighthouse. He enjoyed the peace and quiet, and he loved watching the waves crashing against the rocks. But lately, Omar had been feeling uneasy. He had started to notice strange shadows and figures flickering in the beam of the lighthouse. At first, he dismissed them as tricks of the light, but the shadows kept appearing, growing larger and more distinct each night. Omar could feel a chill run down his spine whenever he saw them. Omar wasn't the only one who was feeling uneasy. The townspeople of Kiran had also started to notice strange things happening. People were disappearing without a trace. One day, a fisherman named Ali vanished while out at sea. The next day, a young girl named Zara disappeared from the market square. The townspeople were scared. They whispered about a curse that had fallen upon their town. They blamed the lighthouse for the disappearances, saying that the shadows were stealing people away. Omar knew that the lighthouse was innocent. He knew that something else was at play. He decided to investigate the shadows and find out what was happening. One night, Omar was polishing the lighthouse lens when he saw a shadow move across the floor. It was a tall, thin shadow with long, sharp claws. Omar's heart pounded in his chest. He grabbed his lantern and crept towards the shadow. As he got closer, the shadow seemed to grow larger and more menacing. Omar could feel the air grow cold around him. He knew that he was not alone. Omar took a deep breath and called out, "Who's there?" The shadow stopped moving. Omar held his breath, listening for any sound. But there was nothing. Omar cautiously moved closer to the shadow. He could see the shadow's eyes glowing red in the darkness. He knew that he was dealing with something powerful. Suddenly, the shadow lunged at Omar. Omar screamed and jumped back, narrowly avoiding the shadow's claws. The shadow hissed and snarled, its red eyes burning into Omar's soul. Omar knew that he had to escape. He ran as fast as he could, the shadow hot on his heels. He raced up the stairs of the lighthouse, the shadow close behind. Omar burst through the door at the top of the lighthouse and ran onto the balcony. The shadow was right behind him. Omar looked around desperately for a way to escape. He saw the lighthouse's lantern, its light shining out over the sea. Omar had an idea. He grabbed the lantern and swung it at the shadow. The shadow screamed and recoiled from the light. Omar took his chance. He jumped over the railing and landed on the roof of the lighthouse. The shadow was still there, but it was afraid of the light. Omar ran to the edge of the roof and looked down. The sea was churning below, the waves crashing against the rocks. Omar knew that he couldn't stay on the roof. He had to find a way to get back inside the lighthouse. Omar looked around the roof. He saw a rope ladder hanging down the side of the lighthouse. He knew that he could use the ladder to get back inside. He carefully made his way to the ladder and started to climb down. The shadow was still there, watching him. Omar could feel its eyes burning into his back. He climbed down the ladder as fast as he could, the shadow still hot on his heels. Omar reached the bottom of the ladder and ran inside the lighthouse. He slammed the door shut and locked it. He could hear the shadow scratching and clawing at the door, trying to get in. Omar knew that he couldn't stay in the lighthouse forever. He had to find a way to defeat the shadow. Omar remembered a story that his grandmother had told him about a magical amulet that could banish shadows. The amulet was said to be hidden in the lighthouse's basement. Omar knew that he had to find the amulet. He grabbed his lantern and headed down to the basement. The basement was dark and dusty. Omar could hear the shadow scratching at the door above. He knew that he had to hurry. Omar searched the basement for the amulet. He looked behind boxes, under tables, and in every nook and cranny. Finally, he found it. The amulet was a small, silver pendant with a glowing blue stone in the center. Omar put the amulet around his neck. He felt a surge of power flow through him. He knew that he could now defeat the shadow. Omar ran back upstairs. He opened the door and stepped outside. The shadow was still there, waiting for him. Omar held up the amulet. The blue stone glowed brightly, and a blinding light filled the air. The shadow screamed and recoiled from the light. It was shrinking, getting smaller and weaker. Omar watched as the shadow faded away, until it was nothing more than a faint wisp of smoke. Omar had defeated the shadow. The townspeople were safe. Omar returned to the lighthouse, his heart filled with relief. He knew that he would always be the guardian of the lighthouse, protecting the townspeople from the shadows of the night.